My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and this is 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the strategic, significant choices that all of us can make in order to be fully alive. Today in the studio, I have my son, Dr. Justin Brown, who reminds us that the grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence, but the grass is most often green wherever we choose to water it. So instead of bouncing from thing to thing, job to job, person to person, friendship to friendship, you might want to consider staying put and going deeper. Listen in. Dr. Justin Michael Brown, welcome back to 3 Words. Obviously, as your father, I know you very well, but I'm presuming our viewers who maybe have not encountered you here in the studio or had listened to one of your, more than 12 episodes at this point. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Dad. So I am a board certified family physician, and I am a member of the DMB coaching team. And my wife and I are in Akron, and we are planning to be there for quite some time, which is a large part of our conversation today.
Well, and that's interesting because we are talking about these 3 words.
Yes, they are plant your feet.
And why is this so important to you? You alluded to the fact that you're going to stay in Akron. I'm guessing there's a connection there.
Yeah, I think that as I think about my life and what I want and who I want to become, I think that I can be living a life and feeling most fulfilled and also make the biggest difference when I choose to plant my feet as opposed to persistently uprooting my feet. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make sure we talked about that today.
And I'm excited because obviously your mother and I have lived here in our town for 30 plus years, and we've been very intentional about that. So when you initiated these 3 words, I was excited to kind of see what your rationale was for living in the same place for a long period of time, and even broader, what are some principles around this idea of planting your feet and why?
Yeah, I think that for many of us, we struggle with feeling that the grass is always greener on the other side and feeling like we're always looking for the next thing that's bigger and better than what we have right now, whether that comes to trying to find a new place to live, trying to find a new workplace or a place where we feel more professionally fulfilled, or even when it comes to our relationships, that we tend to, as humans, just do this shifting and moving and uprooting very, very constantly and ongoing. Mm-hmm. And I think that can have the effect of diminishing and reducing the impact that we can have in life, as well as make it so that we feel maybe less connected or we feel less involved in the things that we're doing, and we feel like our life trajectory is maybe a little bit more unstable.
I love how you're talking about both impact and connection, because some of our latest research, we've seen that sometimes when you bounce from one job to the next, you might actually get a pretty significant pay increase. Mm-hmm. And so you might make more money when you refuse to plant your feet, at least temporarily. That could feel really satisfying. But you're talking about something very different. You're talking about impact. You're talking about connection.
Yeah.
So the cost of maybe bouncing to make a couple more dollars an hour, or even maybe $10,000 more a year, it comes at a great cost that people don't always weigh out.
Yeah. And I think that this idea of planting my feet is something that I really began to think a lot about when I started medical school at the University of Toledo. And knowing that my family was in kind of this Bowling Green, Toledo area, my thought at that time was, I don't want to be like all these doctors who go to med school in one city and then they go to residency in another city, maybe do a fellowship in a third city, and then finally they settle in somewhere in a 4th city for maybe where they'll have the brunt of their career. I wanted to be someone who initially was, okay, maybe I'll do my residency in Toledo and then settle in Toledo. But once Noelle and I kind of realized that we wanted to be in Akron long term, we knew that as soon as we could possibly get to Akron, we wanted to do that so that we could begin to plant our feet and to make some of these roots begin to grow, because we knew that is where we wanted to live our lives and where we wanted to have our impact as well.
I'm going to hit pause in the middle of my conversation with my son to encourage you maybe to share this episode with a friend, forward it to someone who might be considering moving, and just making sure they're doing so thoughtfully. Now back to our conversation. Well, it was interesting. Just this past week, obviously, your mother and I witnessed your final of 3 graduations. Well, across your lifespan, probably 5 or 6 graduations, but obviously you transitioned this past week from a resident to an attending, and your cohort of 7 individuals, physicians, 6 of the 7 are going different places.
They are.
And you have chosen to stay in Akron, Ohio, which probably, to some people listening from around the world are thinking, that doesn't sound like a very exotic, amazing place.
Yeah.
But you're there for different reasons.
I am. Yeah, I think that I, for myself, like being in a small city as compared to a big city where in cities, in the urban setting, there's a lot of inequity. There's a lot of difficulty navigating the healthcare system. And as a physician myself, I want to be able to enter into that. But it's also not like these big cities where there's maybe a lot of resources already wrapped around that, maybe more state funding to some of these bigger cities, things like that, that I felt like, Akron is where we're connected and that's where we want to be. And for my colleagues, that many of them are staying in the Akron area, but I am unique in that I'm choosing to stay with the same health system even. And for me as a physician, I don't want to be the kind of doctor that is, every 5 years I switch offices or practices and suddenly I'm not taking your insurance anymore. I pull back my hours so much that I'm just barely beginning to develop these relationships with my patients and then I tear them away and say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't be your doctor anymore. So even as I'm transitioning into working in the same health system and making this transition into being a full-time family physician, I hope that about 50 to 100 of the patients that were with me when I was training would actually follow me to my new practice. And my commitment to them is that for as long as they would have me, I would gladly be their physician. And even if there are opportunities for me to do other things in other places, whether it's through DMB coaching remotely, or even some of the nonprofit sphere that I'm also going to be working in, I want to be committed to the people who are entrusting their livelihood and their health to me. I want to show that I'm good for following through on the commitment that I'm making to them to be with them and to help them navigate all the various complexities of the healthcare system and as they're navigating their own health as well.
Mom and I are obviously very proud of you and excited that you're choosing to plant your feet in a location that's only a couple hours away. So we would have supported you, of course, if you would have went to the other side of the country. But we're thankful that you obviously chose a place that's nearby. We could stay connected to you. But even for Teresa and I, as we've been here, your mother and I, as we've been here in Bowling Green for over 30 years now, I'm often asked a similar question, like, what are you still doing in Bowling Green? Because the reality is, in all transparency, I could be making a lot more money.
Sure.
With more fancy titles and quite honestly, opportunity for advancement if I were not to stay in one place for this period of time. But I have chosen to do so for the same reason that you have.
Yeah.
People say, what's so special about Bowling Green, Ohio? I said, well, the people, the impact. Because when you find yourself in a space like this, let's just use the university setting, and even for you, I'm sure you'll find this in Akron, you begin to build trust because of longevity.
Yeah.
And you begin to have deep, deep roots in the community that allow you to have influence that is even more powerful than position, the ability to have connection that is more meaningful than title and even pay scale. And so that is what we have chosen. And I'm glad you're choosing similarly, because I think it does most likely lead to a greater sense of happiness and fulfillment across the lifespan.
Yeah. And I think that we live in a society now where I do think because people are bouncing around so much, we are at a loss for longevity, that our organizations, our businesses, our neighborhoods, they are desperate for people who will be there, who will stick around, who have a long history in a place, who know people, who have the connections. In my program where I was training, there were 2 physicians that had been there for, I think, 15 or 20 years. And I'm so glad that I got to train under them and have all of their historical knowledge of the organization and how to navigate that and the respect that comes with having been with the same place for so long. And I was often asking them, what inspired you to be in kind of the same place? And so I'm curious for you, what does that kind of look like? Not only staying in Bowling Green, but even staying with Bowling Green State University for as many years as you have and desiring to continue to do that as your roles are expanding.
Well, oftentimes people are saying, how can you keep doing the same thing for decades on end? And I haven't. I've stayed in the same place, but my role has evolved. My opportunities have grown because I've chosen those opportunities. I have stepped into those opportunities. I've created those opportunities. Oftentimes people are waiting for opportunities to be created for them. I have chosen to create opportunities for myself, not for myself, but to bless others. Yeah. So all of the spaces and places where I have chosen to step into, I feel like I have a great impact. Part of it is a demographic. I'm working with 18 to 22-year-olds who, in many ways, as they're transitioning from the first season of life to the second season of life, obviously we've done a lot of work in 3 Words Podcast, as well as in DMB coaching around the 4 seasons of a person's life. Kathy and I talked about Embrace Your Season in a former episode. but to be with thousands and thousands of students over the course of the last 30 years who are making that transition, for me, it's similar to you. You're thinking in terms of the health. I'm thinking in terms of emotional well-being and obviously maturity and becoming the best version of yourself. It will, I think, as a result, have greater impact. Quite honestly, Justin, generational impact. It's interesting. I'm actually running a mentoring group in Columbus, Ohio now as well, at the request of several folks that have relocated there to run a men's community. And so I'm facilitating that. And it was interesting actually 2 nights ago, I was sitting at this event that I was creating for the Columbus men across some various seasons. And the gentleman next to me who was there for the very first time looked across to another table of younger gentlemen and said, had I had these kind of conversations 20 years ago, my life would be completely different. Really proud of them at 23, 24, 25 years old to come into a space like this to have these conversations. Bring it back here to Bowling Green. None of that would have happened had I bounced. None of that would have happened had I said, ooh, $10,000 more, $15,000 more, a new title, a new opportunity. I've tried to kind of plant my feet while continuing to evolve in hopes of increasing impact and influence across my lifespan.
I love that you're talking about even the 4 seasons of life within the context of this conversation, because I'm curious about that interplay that, with each new season of life, as you move on from the season of identity to investigation and influence and inspiration, I think is the 4th one.
Sure.
And that you don't need to say, I've found my identity here and now I'm going to go investigate things somewhere else. Or now that I've investigated here, I'm going to have my influence somewhere else. And now I'm going to give inspiration to others in a totally new place or with new relationships and a new geography and a new workplace and a new profession. But that we can choose to be intentional about each new season of life. We can pivot, we can transition, we can be in a totally new season, but how do we stay in the same place?
Well, and again, I think we should at least acknowledge there are going to be times when you're going to need to relocate.
Yeah.
And where you're going to really feel like the next step in your professional or personal development, maybe you met someone special who is relocating somewhere else.
Sure.
I mean, there are some legitimate reasons why people would choose to not plant their feet, but actually go. I have no problem, and I love this conversation, with people choosing to relocate.
Yeah.
Or to choose a new position, or even, so what we're not saying here in this podcast episode, don't pursue another opportunity in a different city, a different part of the country, but don't get in the habit of bouncing from place to place to place to place. That's
thoughtlessly.
Or even, if I may, and again, you did this episode, you and I had this conversation, 3-word podcast, Make Less Money, right? If you've not listened to that one, you will really want to. It's very provocative. But the reality is, I would also say, don't just do it for the money.
Sure.
Because that's typically why people aren't planting their feet. Because it's like, ooh, but there's more money over here.
Yeah.
But we know that money's not going to be the key to happiness after a certain dollar amount.
Right.
And so why sacrifice impact, human connection for dollars? And again, you've talked a little bit professionally, but I'm guessing you also see personal benefits in your personal life, in relationships and friendships, as to why you might stay in one place.
Yeah. And I think, there's more than just geography in my workplace that is resonates with me in this conversation. And that I've had friends for 5, 10, 15, and I have one friend who I've been very close with for even 20 years. And I think that the presence of those individuals in my life and that stability of relationships, I think is incredibly meaningful and important to me. Similarly, I see my relationship with my wife as a forever relationship. I see the relationships I have with my family members as a forever relationship. And I want to have longevity in those spaces and see those as being relationships that I will firmly plant my feet in. Even as we only just recently, 3 years ago, moved to Akron, we're kind of finding our place in our kind of friend groups and our different communities there. And there are times where we feel like, we are not as connected to this group or to these people as we would want to be. And we can be faced with the decision of, do we want to find another group of people to try to become connected with and start fresh and hope that it works out a little bit better? Or do we choose to invest more deeply in the relationships where we already are found? So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So even planting your feet has significant impact upon the depth of relationship. You're using that idea of the grass is always greener. We tend to think on the other side of the fence, but the grass is always greener where you water it.
Yeah.
So what you're suggesting, even in the context of friendship, is that if the friendship isn't as deep and as meaningful as you want, you don't need to bounce to the other side of the fence. You can simply begin to water the grass underneath your feet, go deeper, be more intentional, be more inquisitive, be more inclusive, inviting with each of these individuals. So the relationship actually, you're helping to water it and actually helping it to become deep where you have planted your feet. Final thoughts as you wrap up this conversation and just even a word of encouragement maybe to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, so I would say to our viewers and our listeners today, first of all, if you are in an abusive relationship, I'd encourage you to abandon it. If you are in a workplace that is dysfunctional, that is not paying you well, not paying you fairly for the work that you're doing, if you're being mistreated, you should abandon that space. If you are in a house or a home that is not safe, it is too cramped, it does not fit your family's needs, get out of there and pursue a healthier relationship, pursue a better work environment, pursue a geography and a housing and residential setting that makes more sense for you. But my encouragement would be that when that temptation comes, as it often does for all of us, that you would think, I think I want to uproot my feet. I would just encourage that you would do so thoughtfully rather than thoughtlessly, that you would not just take that next opportunity without really thinking about it, but that you would be intentional and think about, do I want to uproot my feet? Or is it more valuable and is it wiser for me in this setting to plant my feet?
Dr. Brown, son, thanks for being here today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Dad.
So 3 Words Podcast family, thanks so much for joining us again today for this particular episode with my son, Dr. Justin Brown. We had a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. What's interesting about Justin, he also is the one who goes back into all of our podcasts, all 180 plus at this point in time, and actually puts together a 1 or 2 page PDF that's available on our website, dmbcoaching.com. If you go there and click on the 3 Words Podcast, you can actually download a summary and a cliff notes of every single episode of 3 Words that we've ever hosted here in our studio. So that said, we look forward to seeing you at the next episode.